evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good evening rather. I'm Arjuna Manamperi, Chairman of the National Issues Committee of the OPA, one of the Vice Presidents of OPA. Today, we have an exciting session organized by the National Issues Committee, and I'm the host on behalf of my committee. It is about the current financial situation, internal and external financial situation of the country, which is a very pertinent topic for all of us. Before I go further, I want to thank, just an informal thank you to all my committee members and the staff of the OPA, but there will be a formal vote of thanks by the General Secretary at the end of the day, end of the session. Without any further ado, I'd like to invite President of the OPA, Engineer Shantha Senrath, to give you a few do a warm welcome and introduce you to the session today. Thank you, President. Please, over to you.
Thank you. It gives me immense pleasure to participate in this webinar on the title Sri Lanka's current financial situation, organized by the National Issues Committee of the OPA. At the very outset, I, on behalf of the OPA, would like to very warmly welcome Dr. W.A. Wijewardena, former Deputy Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, who is the presenter at this very important and timely webinar. Also, I would like to welcome our all the past presidents, forum members, office bearers, the General Secretary, the Treasurer, and Mr. Tulitha Perera, the President-elect, who is playing the role of the moderator today at this webinar, and also the Chairman of the National Issues Committee, Engineer Arjuna Manamperi, who has given the leadership in organizing this webinar. Sri Lanka's dwindling foreign exchange reserves has presently become a hot topic in all print and electronic media and all social media. More and more new regulations and gazette notifications are being introduced on daily basis, imposing new taxes, price ceilings, import regulations, so on and so forth, all because of this issue. Therefore, this webinar titled Sri Lanka's current financial situation is very timely, and I thank the organizing committee for the timely action taken to organize this webinar. Considering the knowledge and experience of our guest speaker, knowledge and experience our guest speaker possesses, I am sure all of us would be able to listen to a very informative presentation from Dr. Wijewardena that will give us the true picture of the current financial situation of the country. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the webinar. Over to Engineer Arjuna Manamperi. Let me introduce Engineer Arjuna Manamperi. Engineer Arjuna Manamperi is a chartered engineer by profession, and he is a Vice President of the OPA and the Chairman of the National Issues Committee, one of the very important and vibrant standing committees of the OPA. So he is taking the leadership in organizing this webinar. Over to Engineer Arjuna Manamperi. Thank you.
President, thank you very much. Thank you for the kind interrupt. Moderator, who is none other than our President-elect, Tulitha Perera. Mr. Tulitha Perera, he's our President-elect. He will be taking over from Engineer Shantha Senrath in a few months' time. He's a capable man for the job, for the topic, because he's a By profession, he's a chartered accountant and also very much and very experienced KPMG partner in Sri Lanka. So my introductions are very small. All of us are very much professionals in this organization, in the forum. So I will hand over the topic to the sessions to the moderator, my colleague and friend and our partner and our president-elect, Dulitha Pera. Dulitha, take it over.
Speak on this topic, covering the aspects of current severe national issues that are being faced both in external and internal finances. How do we get into these unprecedented situations? How did we get into this trap? What are the possible solutions to get out of this situation in the short, medium, and longer term basis? And to do the justice for this, we have Dr. W.A. Wijewardena, who is a former Deputy Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, who had a career central banker, retired from the central bank as its Deputy Governor in 2009, after serving that institution for nearly 40 years. Whilst he was there in the central bank, he has been involved in almost all the areas of central banking, including economic research, monetary policy, financial system stability, at the Provident Fund and the currency issue management, public debt, rural credit, and banking. He had initiated setting up of Sri Lanka Accounting and Auditing Standards as the chairman of the Sri Lanka Accounting and Auditing Standards Monitoring Board from 2000 to 2008. If I may have to speak and elaborate on his profile, there is quite a lot to say about him. And he's a very active personality on print media, where he provides a lot of thought leadership on topical matters. So may I now invite Dr. Wijewardena to speak on this topic. Over to you, Doctor.
Engineer Senarath, Engineer Manamperi, and on the current economic problems in Sri Lanka and how we have come to this position, as Engineer Manamperi has just explained, and what are the possible solutions that we are having in order to overcome this problem. So before we start our formal session, we'll have to acknowledge the fact that in the case of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, there has been one governor leaving that position and a new governor has assumed his office. And the new governor had been an old governor with whom I had worked for 3 years. Even before he came to Central Bank, I had been working with him when I was the chairman of the Accounting Standards and Auditing Monitoring Board, where he was a member. Therefore, he was an old pal of mine. And we hope that he would be able to remove all the mess that had been created in Sri Lanka's economy, in the external sector, in the financial sector, and in all types of ailments that we are suffering. And we'll have to wish him good luck. So before I start, I will have to remind you that this one disqualification, because you may have heard of a man called Steve Jobs, who actually created an empire called the Apple's Group. And his biographer, Walter Isaacson, had said that Steve Jobs had never ever trusted a man who had come before him with a PowerPoint presentation. The reason is that he had said that the person who comes up with the PowerPoint presentation doesn't know his subject, number one, and cannot explain himself, number two. And therefore, when I have come before you with the PowerPoint presentation, I have to admit that I suffer from both disqualifications. I don't know my subject and I cannot explain myself. So given that disqualification, I will start, I will speak for about say 30 to 35 minutes before we have our question and answer session, during which you can ask any questions from me and I will be able to answer them as faithfully as possible. The topic that was given to me was Sri Lanka's present economic malaise, its causes. In other words, as Engineer Manamperi has said, how we have come to this particular position and the solutions for the way forward. I will have to take you through our historical economic growth data, which is given by this particular graph. The red line in the graph shows the growth rate in each year from year 1950 to year 2000. The gray line is the average economic growth rate during this particular time period. And the one above that is the desired economic growth rate for Sri Lanka to become a developed country within a single generation. For example, Singapore became a developed country within a single generation. The level of economic growth which a country has to maintain in order to become a developed country within a single generation, that is about 25 years, is the economic growth rate of about say 7% continuously year after year. That is the level of economic growth that we want. But after year 2016, the requirement has now gone up to 8.5% because actually 9% because of the negative economic growth and the slow economic growth that we had experienced since that year. If you examine the graph carefully, you will see the minimum rate of growth that is needed for Sri Lanka to become a developed country, we have exceeded only on 4 occasions. There again, the growth rate had been only a temporary peak in our growth rate chart. Immediately after we had reached that level, Sri Lanka had not been able to maintain continuously and we had fallen below. Which means that our economic problem is not actually a new thing. It's a perennial problem which we had experienced ever since Sri Lanka became an independent country from the British in 1948. So we cannot blame the present era as an era where we had been experiencing this kind of difficulties. But we have to remember the fact that the present economic malaise that we are having is the cumulative effect of the slow economic growth that we had, which was on average equal to about say 4% ever since Sri Lanka became independent from the British. So the year 2021 and the next 4 years are very challenging for Sri Lanka due to several reasons. Reason number one is that Sri Lanka had been in the declining path of economic growth from around say year 2013 and year 2019 when the new government came to power, the growth rate had come down to a very low level of 2.3%, followed by a negative economic growth of 3.6% in year 2020, partly as a result of the continuation of the slowing down of the economy in the past, and partly due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic from around March 2020 in that year. As a result, as I mentioned, the economic growth was in the negative region at 3.6%. And the government expected a very quick recovery for Sri Lanka's economy, which we call a V-shaped recovery. But the independent analysts, taking into account the realistic factor that the COVID-19 pandemic can hit an economy in a number of waves, and attributed to the economic recovery as a prolonged economic recovery, which would take the shape of a letter W. And in fact, as it is, since we have been hit by the fourth wave of the COVID-19 pandemic from around, say, July this year, and we don't know when we will have the fifth wave, it appears that it will be a combination of several Ws before we recover our economy to the normal level. So that is why year 2021 and next 4 years are very challenging for Sri Lanka. And that challenge is, remember, it's not a challenge of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, it's a challenge of all of us who are the citizens of this country. So the first half of year 2021, the Department of Census Statistics has just released the second quarter growth data. So we have the economic data for the first half of the year. If we take the entire first half, it is about, say, 5% of the economic growth on average, compared to 3.6% for the full year of 2020, negative 2020. And this 5% has been attained by Sri Lanka from the low base which we had in the previous year, where growth was negative at 9% during the first half of year 2020. So therefore, we had started from a low growth, and we had not been able to surpass the economic performance of Sri Lanka in year 2019, where the economic performance was a very low economic performance. So still we have not been able to reach that level, because if you take the position in Sri Lanka, if you take actually the year 2019 as a benchmark year, and if you assume that in the first half of year 2019, we had produced 100 coconuts in Sri Lanka. Since the economic growth in the first half of year 2020 was negative at 9%, we had produced only 91 coconuts. With this 5% economic growth in the first half of year 2021, we have been able to increase our coconut production from 91 to, say, 97. So we are still below the level of performance we had in a very bad year of year 2019. The inflation rate in Sri Lanka is now rising, and for the purpose of calculating this growth data, the Department of Census and Statistics uses a price index called GDP deflator, which includes, in addition to the prices, the consumer products that we include in our consumer price index called the CCPI, or the National Price Index, it has the prices of import goods and the prices of export goods as well. So it's an overall index which includes all the goods and services that are taken into account when we calculate the growth numbers. That particular GDP deflator has increased in the first half of year 2021 by 7.4%, whereas the inflation rate according to the Colombo Consumer Price Index is just 4.5%. So which means the actual inflation rate in Sri Lanka faced by us is much higher than the inflation rate measured by the Colombo Consumer Price Index. If we use the US dollars, in US dollar terms, in US dollar terms, the economic growth, the total output in the first half of year 2020 was just 10 billion US dollars. In the first half of 2021, it has gone up to only 10.9 billion US dollars. As a result, the economic growth rate in terms of US dollars is about 7% in the first half. But remember, this has been mainly due to the keeping of the exchange rate at 199 rupees per US dollar and not the market exchange rate that we had during this period. If we use the market exchange rate, our total output would have been even lower than the output that we had produced in the first half of 2020 because of the higher exchange rate that we have to use to convert it into US dollar terms. So the long-term economic growth is not the only ailment faced by Sri Lanka today. Because the low economic growth is the one that I had attributed to you, but there are many other ailments from which Sri Lanka's economy is suffering. And if you take all these ailments together, it's actually a composite type of a disease from which we are suffering. And as a result, our patient is in a very critical situation. In fact, the patient is actually in the not in the general ward of but the special care institutions in the in a hospital administration. How our ailments are: we have a mounting debt problem, we have a foreign exchange issue, forex issue. Our budget is totally uncontrollable. The government has resorted to money printing and by adopting a new, monetary policy framework called the modern monetary theory. And the rupee is on one way to depreciation. And because of all these ailments, there is the lowest level of confidence of foreign investors in Sri Lanka. So we have lost the investor confidence. I will explain one by one these ailments. If you take the debt problem, getting or borrowing money from outside per se is not an evil. As you are aware, as professionals, entrepreneurs, and people who are involved in running businesses, you may know that if we borrow money and use that borrowed money productively, we are not into a debt problem anymore. But if we have borrowed money and use that money in order to increase our consumption without putting them back to investments which would produce us more outputs in the future, our situation is very bad. This is exactly what Sri Lanka had done all these years after we got independence in 1948. At the time of getting independence from the British, our foreign debt situation was a very comfortable foreign debt situation. Our total public debt was just 16% of our GDP in that year. And the foreign debt was just 4% of GDP out of this 16%. So we had 4% of GDP by way of foreign debt and 12% of GDP by way of domestic debt. But the level of foreign exchange that we had, the amount of foreign currency reserve that the British left us when they left Sri Lanka, was sufficient to finance 17 months of future imports in 1948, which is a huge amount. And that is why many people say Sri Lanka was a country of promise at the time it gained independence from the British, because there was no any other nation in South Asia or Southeast Asia with that massive amount of foreign exchange balance with them. But what happened was, after independence, because of the budgetary policies that we had introduced, by each successive government, our foreign exchange balance started depleting. And by year 1959, the foreign reserve, which was sufficient for financing 17 months of future import, was sufficient to finance only 2 months of future imports in 1959. Since then, we had a very critical situation, and it had not good more than 3 to 4 months of imports even in any given year. As a result, the government had to, instead of trying to find the solution for this particular problem, or going to the depth of the problem, what the government did was, what is feasible for it, to introduce a very draconian set of import and exchange controls. I have to remind you, as professionals, the exchange control was introduced to called Ceylon by the British during the Second World War to prevent Sri Lanka's foreign reserves falling into the hands of the enemies. The enemies were the Germans and the Japanese. Because before the Second World War, Sri Lanka had a free economy like today. The exchange rate was determined out of the foreign exchange balances that we are earning. But during 1942, they introduced exchange control, and it was a temporary measure which would have been removed after the end of the war and when Sri Lanka became independent. But what happened was, instead of removing it from the law books, Ceylon introduced it as a permanent law in 1953. In fact, the person who was behind this particular whole affair was the late Mr. Vijayawardena, the first Ceylonese governor of the central bank, who joined the central bank as the control of exchange during the wartime, and he became deputy governor, and later he became the governor. When I became the deputy governor in year 2000, the late Mr. Vijayawardena confided in me that one of the biggest mistakes he made in his life was to bring exchange control as a permanent tool in the law books of Sri Lanka, because he himself was a victim subsequently. We still have exchange control, even though the Exchange Control Act was repealed and a new Foreign Exchange Act was introduced in year 2018. Of Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the exchange control and import controls have been used predominantly to prevent Sri Lanka going out of Sri Lanka. So the debt problem today is a mounting debt problem, as I told you, because the governments had actually run budget deficits throughout the post-independence period. Therefore, they had to borrow. In addition to the government sector, the private sector also started borrowing. Therefore, we are now having a problem of the country debt rather than the central government debt. For instance, at the end of year 2019, the central government foreign debt was just 35 billion of US dollars. But the total country debt was 56 billion. Therefore, there was 21 billion of US dollars we have in the sector. Today, if we are to repay this debt on time, it is not only the government debt that we have to meet meet the country debt. According to the central bank data, within the next according to the central bank data, within the next 12-month period, the total liability on account of the repayment of the principal and the payment of interest on country debt, not the central government debt, about $16 billion US. In addition to that, government has borrowed from the local market, but of course, borrowing from the local market is not that much of a problem because there is no sacrifice to be made by people when they repay the debt, domestic, because what they do is it's a recycling of the debt presently owned by local people by other people in the country. So therefore, it's a recycling, but it's not a burden. Burden as such in terms of economics. But the foreign debt is a big problem because we don't have enough foreign resources to meet this foreign debt requirement. End of July, our foreign reserves were only $2.8 billion US, which was sufficient only for 6 months of imports. With the allocation of special drawing rights or SDRs by the IMF in August, and also with obtaining some soft facility of $150 million US from Bangladesh, the foreign reserve balance had increased to $3.5 billion US by the end of August 2021. But this is a misleading indicator because, as I mentioned, the foreign exchange commitments by Sri Lanka on account of debt repayment alone is 6.9 billion in the next 12-month period. In addition to that, Sri Lanka has to meet the cost of fuel bill, which comes about $350 million US per month. It has to import medicines, it has to import food items, and also it has to meet the liability on account of the Asian Clearing Union, which also comes about 300 million every 3 months time period. So given all these foreign exchange commitments which Sri Lanka has, this $3.5 billion US stock of foreign reserves is a peanut. On top of that, there is another alarming development that has taken place. Even though the gross foreign reserves are 3.5 billion, the net foreign reserves which Sri Lanka is having has come down to, in the case of central bank, about $50 million US from $2.8 million US in end of July. It is now to $2.8 billion US in July to $50 million US. So overall, if we take the entire banking sector, consisting of the central bank and commercial banks, the net foreign reserves of Sri Lanka is negative to the extent of $3.5 billion US. That means even if we have gross reserves, they are not sufficient because we are committed to the rest of the world on top of that to the tune of $3.5 billion US. So that's a very alarming situation. And in the case of commercial banks from around, say, February onwards, their net foreign reserves were negative. And that is why there are no dollars available in banks when the importers go and try to buy their dollars. All these things have happened because of the uncontrollable budget. The budgetary policy in Sri Lanka throughout the post-independence period had been guided by what is known as the Keynesian economics. The first perpetrator of this crime was the first finance minister, J.R. Jayawardena, who is said to have read Keynes's General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, the book he published in 1936, in 1942. And immediately after he read that, he had become a fan of Keynes. Because Keynes had prescribed that the country can promote its economic activities by printing money. By using that money, the government can increase the government expenditure. When the expenditure goes up, the total demand in the economy will go up. When the total demand goes up, the total supply will go up. When the total supply goes up, the country will have economic growth. Now, this was the main reason why J.R. Jayawardena started using deficit budgets in his very first budget in 1947. I compared his 1947 budget and the budgets he submitted till year 1952 with the budget presented by Mahinda Rajapaksa for year 2021. I find they are one and the same. The mission, the scope, the vision of the budget, they are one and the same. The Jaya Jayawardena had introduced a full employment budget in 1947, followed by 5 more budgets after that. Mahinda Rajapaksa has introduced a budget of prosperity, again similar to the concept of full employment. And these budgetary problems, because they have run the budget deficit by borrowing from abroad as well as from the domestic market. But at the same time, what the governments had done with central banks' total collaboration, they had actually maintained the interest rates at a very low level. Therefore, Sri Lanka's savings have been at a very low level, and except the forced saving or compulsory saving from the Employees Provident Fund, where the employer has to contribute 12% of the salary of a worker and 8% by the employee. The voluntary savings that our people are making is actually very, very low. For example, if on average, if a Sri Lankan earns 100 rupees per month, he saves only 20 rupees, consumes 80 rupees, and therefore the savings rate has been very low. Because of these low savings, the government cannot borrow from the domestic sources. If the government cannot borrow from us, what the government has done is they have resorted to get the central bank to print money. And this is how this famous money printing issue has been raised by the present opposition, with ignoring the fact that during their time also, when they were power, they resorted to money printing. So money printing has been the general practice made by every successive finance minister after independence. This was not the case before 1950 when Sri Lanka had the currency board system, because the currency boards cannot print money as a central bank. For a currency board to issue money, as you are aware, it must have 100% backing of a foreign currency reserve with the currency board. For example, if a US dollar is equal to 10 rupees, the currency board can print and issue 10 rupees only if it acquires 1 US dollar. If he loses that, if the currency board loses that 1 US dollar, then it has to recall that 10 rupees and cancel it out. So therefore, currency board was a disciplinarian on our finance ministers, and therefore they could not borrow, they could not print money and finance the government budgetary operations. But unfortunately for us, we have set up a central bank here, and the central bank has been taught by many politicians that its job is to print money and give to the government. And this is being extensively practiced and accepted by the central bank under the Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration. So that is why many critics have said that the central bank had adopted the monetary policy known as the modern monetary theory, or MMT, which means that which says that there's nothing wrong in printing money because the government has the monopoly power of printing money. Let it print money, use that money, just like the Keynesian case. When it uses money, the aggregate demand will be higher. When the aggregate demand is higher, aggregate supply will be high. When the aggregate supply is higher, economic prosperity is higher. Ignoring the fact that Sri Lanka is an open economy, and part of that money will go out of Sri Lanka through import of goods and services, creating problems in the balance of payments and creating problems for the foreign exchange balances, creating problems for the exchange. Now, this is one of the biggest problems we are facing today. So money printing has become one of the important things that our present government has done. Just to give you a flavor of the time that they have committed, during the period from December 2019 to July 2021, because we have the latest data only up to July 2021, it's a 19-month period. Total money stock in Sri Lanka had increased by 2,700 billion Sri Lanka rupees, or 35%, which is a very dramatic and high increase of money stock. So that's the amount of money printed by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka during this period. Total money stock, I'm referring to. Not the money printed by Central Bank as coins and notes, it's the total money in the hands of the people. If we take the government's borrowings, the government's contribution to this money printing during this 19-month period, government had borrowed from the banking sector 3,200 billion Sri Lanka rupees, much more than the total money that we are in the economy. The balance 400 billion had gone out of Sri Lanka, creating problems in our balance of payments. But what we have to keep in our mind is that when you increase money stock by 35%, it will build up the inflationary pressures in the economy, and those inflationary pressures have not yet been experienced by us. They are yet to come. Because we were able to moderate the inflation pressures to some extent because we were able to import the basic food items and other requirements of the Sri Lankan people. But with the paucity of foreign exchange, which has simply disappeared from the market today, we cannot import food items anymore unless we borrow money from some outsider. There will be a shortage of goods in the future, and as a result, the inflation will start, raising its ugly head again. As a result of this, another important ailment that we have been suffering is the one-way journey of the Sri Lanka rupee to depreciation. During the British period, when we had the currency board system, the question of currency depreciation didn't arise because the currency was not printed in excessive amount. As a result, when in 1947, Sri Lanka rupee was a very strong currency in South Asia, and it was traded at 3 rupees and 31 cents per US dollar in 1947. When the British government devalued its sterling pound in 1948, Sri Lanka also did the same thing, and as a result, the currency exchange rate fell from 331 to 476 in 1948, and it was continuously at that rate, despite the fact there was pressure for Sri Lanka rupee to be devalued in the market. What happened was, the government started, instead of sorting out the problem, government started introducing import and exchange controls, as I told you. It created a huge black economy, created a huge additional cost for the citizens of the country. They had to wait in waiting list or queues. There was a thriving and flourishing black market of goods and foreign currency, and all kinds of economic elements were there in the economy, which were not actually recorded by the mainstream economists of the country. But they were there, people are suffering. Now, if we take the example of Singapore, which was also a British colony, they also had the currency board system before they became independent, and they had to make a choice whether to continue with the currency board system or set up a central bank as all other newly independent countries have done. Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, all the countries. The people who were in charge of the economic destiny of Singapore at that time, who are known as the Old Guard, they had very carefully assessed the situation, and they have found, even though the currency board system is a relic of the colonial masters, it had introduced the most wanted discipline on the politicians of the country. So as a result, Singapore continued with the board system, did set up a central bank, and Singapore dollar was traded around 331 in year 1960. It continued to appreciate in the market, and today it's about 135 Singapore dollars per US dollar. And when the currency appreciates in this manner, one of the most important requirements is, since it might hit the exporters, you have to improve the productivity in the economy. So what Singapore did was, it actually spent a huge amount of resources on education, healthcare services, research and development, logistical services, infrastructure, to improve the productivity levels of Singapore. And when the currency therefore appreciated in the market, the productivity also improved, absorbing that appreciation and without passing any cost on to the exporters. Now today, as a result, the Singaporean currency is at a very high level compared to Sri Lanka. You can see that the countries which had the same destiny. In fact, Sri Lanka's destiny was pretty much, glorious than that of Singapore, because we had, as I told you, a foreign reserve balance sufficient for financing 17 months of future imports. Singapore didn't have that luxury. But what it did was it actually followed, it didn't want to follow this Keynesian economics like our Jayawardena, because they thought that the prosperity comes, according to the first finance minister of Singapore, Dr. Goh Keng Swee, prosperity comes not from the money printed by the central bank, but by hard. He had further elaborated the hard work should be made by students at schools, undergraduates at universities, and high technical institutions, and workers at workplaces. He had said that by having a currency board and by having a system where the politicians cannot print money according to their will and desires, Singapore had delivered 3 messages, one to their future politicians, next one to their own citizens, third one to people in the rest of the world. The message delivered to their future politicians is, if you want to have these vote-catching expenditure programs, you must bring money from your homes. You can't use the central bank printed money for that purpose. The message delivered to Singaporean citizens was, if you want better public services, you must be prepared to pay for them. In other words, the crucial message called, there is no such thing as a free lunch, was delivered to Singaporean citizens. The message delivered to the people in the rest of the world is, leave your valuable foreign savings with us. We will not only use them productively, but also will ensure a good yield for you and a safe return of what you have lent to us. Now, this did the trick, and Singapore was able to improve its productivity level, expand its infrastructure component, and was able to become a developed country within a single generation. Whereas Sri Lanka is still struggling, as I presented to you, to remain as from moving from a lower middle income country to a higher middle income country. Because of the policy inconsistency that we had followed, we actually enjoy, and that is why you would have noted the Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa been presenting the 2 bills in Parliament last week. He had actually used a good parable to explain the situation. He had said the present situation in Sri Lanka is just like the man who is facing the threat of death, 3 threats of death, licking his hand with some honey. So that is the situation we are. Inside the country, we think, we are masters, we can do everything. We are the best people in the world, but the people outside know that Sri Lanka is a very fragile country, doesn't have a consistent and continuous economic policy package. Politicians are just, shooting things out of their mouth without even thinking. So as a result, they don't want to put their value saved money into Sri Lanka. So this is the reason that we are in this particular situation. Now, the present government, which is faced with this problem, has come up with a number of solutions. The first solution is, as pronounced by outgoing Governor Laxman, again and again when he addressed the public, when he talked to people, the government was following an alternative policy which would promote Sri Lanka's national economy domestically by using the money printed by the central bank, which leads to excessive money printing. As I mentioned earlier, during the 19-month time period from December 2019, the total money stock in Sri Lanka had gone up by 2,700 billion Sri Lanka rupees, or 35%, excessive. It has led to create inflationary pressures in the country. And what they believed was, because since they had followed what is known as this modern monetary theory, which says, don't worry about inflation, print money and spend it. The aggregate demand will go up, aggregate supply will go up, the inflation rate would die out on its own automatically. So there was a very, this alternative policy package is the one which Governor Laxman was talking about. But fortunately for us, the new Governor Cabral, in an interview with Bloomberg today, had said that he would revisit this modern monetary theory type money printing, and he will reverse it as soon as possible without causing any pain to Sri Lanka's economy through a roadmap. He's going to put up a roadmap. I hope that Governor Cabral will walk the talk. It may not be just a promise he had given to Bloomberg and through Bloomberg to the people in the rest of the world. Then export and import controls have been introduced to Sri Lanka through monetary policy. Large number of consumer products cannot be imported to Sri Lanka and their prices have gone up. The underlying justification of it is that they say that the scarcity that is created in the market will push up their prices, and as a result, the production will go up and therefore prosperity will be delivered. For example, in the case of turmeric, even though we don't spend that much of money to import turmeric to Sri Lanka, in total, it was banned. So no more turmeric. The prices went up to even 20,000 rupees per kilogram. And many said that it is a good move because our farmers can now cultivate turmeric and therefore they can earn that money which had been earlier earned by the farmers in Tamil Nadu. But for us to do that, our turmeric growers will have to be guided by the Department of Agriculture as to how they should do it without suffering from any ailment, any pest or any weed control. And also, a market has to be developed in order to enable them to sell their turmeric to those people. And then that turmeric will have to be converted into a consumer product through an industrial process. And this didn't take place. So as a result, farmers in Ampara district had cultivated turmeric, and finally, they had to throw it away because there was no market for them to sell it. And even today, after 1 year of, after 2 seasons of cultivation of turmeric in Sri Lanka, still the price of turmeric is about 12,000 rupees per kilogram. Not 12,000, 1,200 rupees per kilogram. So these are very pathetic situation. Then instead of stopping the money printing machine and using an appropriate realistic monetary policy, what the government did was government had introduced price controls on number of consumer items, even though those prices were not guiding in the market. For example, there is a control price for sugar, but sugar is not available at that control price. There is a control price for rice. There is no rice available at that control price because there's a scarcity. But the government also cannot do anything because there's a scarcity. Now, for example, the government had tried to, raid all these stores that were hoarding, that were keeping sugar and rice and paddy. with a very, very popular fanfare and tamasha with television cameras to show the people that the price increase was mainly due to the unpatriotic work of the traders. But without realizing that whatever that they have discovered as rice that have been hoarded in those stores, it's sufficient only to feed Sri Lanka for one day, because we need about 5 to 6 tons of metric tons of rice per day to feed Sri Lanka. And whatever they have discovered is about that number. So we can feed them only one. So what do we do after we lose the market? So there is no question, there is no any solution for that. Then there are palliatives introduced by the central bank to preserve to build up the foreign exchange reserves, and also to keep the Sri Lanka rupee, Sri Lanka exchange rate at the present level of 203 rupees per US dollar, and they were not sufficient. And one palliative is the going into this swap facility with China, Bangladesh, and India. Even in the interview with Bloomberg, Governor Cabral said he's going to negotiate a new swap facility with China, in addition to the already agreed swap facility of 10 billion yuan or 1.5 billion US dollars approved by China previously. These swap facilities are just a palliative because they are very costly affair. Because if I explain, because anyone who is outside the central bank may not know the exact technicality involved in this. Therefore, please permit me to explain that, because some of you may be knowing it. Don't think that it's a boring thing. Now, for example, take the swap facility of 150 million US dollars that we got from China. What we did was we got 120 million US dollars that we agreed to give equivalent amount of Sri Lanka rupees to Bangladesh. So what would happen is that in the books of the Bangladesh bank, they will create an account and credit 150 million US dollars in the name of Sri Lanka Central Bank. But in terms of the swap agreement, Bangladesh has said, don't keep your money in the central bank and keep it in a designated commercial bank. So what would happen is a commercial bank will open an account in the name of Bangladesh Bank. Sri Lanka Central Bank will print 300 billion Sri Lanka rupees and credit that account. The interest rate applicable to this particular swap facilities, 6 months LIBOR, which is London Interbank Offered Rate, which is about 0.05% today, plus 2% margin. So the interest rate comes to about 2.05% on the swap transactions. But that is not the cost. There are two other costs. Cost number one is the 300 billion that we have credited to the account of Bangladesh Bank in a commercial bank is Bangladesh. They can use that money to invest in a government treasury bill at 6% today and earn at 6%. And we have to permit them to take that 6% also out. So the total cost is more than 8% for this particular swap facility. The second risk cost is that if Bangladesh Bank calls for this money after the 9-month period, since we have used the dollars for importing goods, we don't have dollars with us. Either we have to use our existing foreign reserves or we have to borrow from abroad. If we borrow from abroad, we have to pay again at the current market rate, which is about 10%. So whatever it may be, the total cost is very high. Then the government has actually relied a very heavy reliance on tax amnesty and the Port City project. Even in the interview of Governor Cabral with Bloomberg today, he had said that he's relying on inflows of foreign currency through these two sources, which he has to be realized in the future. In the case of Port City, of course, I think he is misinforming the members of the public, because Port City is like a separate economic zone carved out of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. and we can equate it to a ship that has been anchored in the waters of Sri Lanka. That ship comes there, anchors itself, and does trade with the rest of the world. And what we get is only the rent income for permitting that ship to be anchored in our waters. Whatever the accounts to be maintained by the Port City project will be maintained not in Sri Lankan banks, but in banks outside. So the dollar, in fact, it's a dollarized economy. It's not Sri Lanka rupee which will be used in that particular economy, it's a dollars. And as a result, they don't want to keep their dollars in Sri Lankan bank, but they know our banks do not have their even current foreign exchange position is a negative current position. So they don't have dollars. Whatever the dollars they deposit with that bank would be just like, putting water into a sinking well. It will just dry out immediately. So therefore, they will maintain their accounts outside. So Governor Cabral cannot expect dollars from the Port City project. He can expect only the rent that he would get by way of renting the land. The tax amnesty is another factor because tax amnesty will be viewed as promoting money laundering by the rest of the world. During my long career in the central bank spanning for about, say, 40 years, I have seen many finance ministers resorted to this particular practice. It was Dr. Nempera in 1970 who did so by demonetizing the 50 rupee and 100 rupee notes and introducing a tax relief for people who would bring that money to formal sector. The money that was collected was even less than the printing cost of the new currency stock. Then it was introduced by Ronnie Damal, which was a failure. Then when President Premadasa became president, he introduced two pieces of legislation. One was to attract foreign black money to Sri Lanka's banking system by permitting Sri Lanka's banking system to operate numbered accounts similar to the system prevailing in Switzerland. The Act wanted those people to bring that money and no question will be asked. No data would be released to anyone. It will be kept secret. So as a result, there was no any fear, according to President Premadasa, for bringing that black money to Sri Lanka. Second was to introduce a system called certificates of deposit, CDs, by the public debt department to people who have black money, because the CDs, the feature of CDs is that no name is printed there. It's a nameless security, which is known as a bearer bond. So if I find a CD on the street, it is mine, just like a currency note. So the central bank will pay the value of the CD to the person who would present it for repayment on maturity. So no question will be asked. Both were not able to generate a sufficient amount of foreign exchange or black money to Sri Lanka, were failure. But it actually painted an indelible black mark on Sri Lanka as a money laundering promoting country. In 1994, US government took it to task. It said that unless these two acts are repealed, US government will import sanctions on Sri Lanka's exports, now apparel exports. So President Chandrika Kumartunga had to Parliament have both acts repealed in 1998. Then year 2002, Ranil Wickremesinghe government also introduced a tax, the foreign exchange amnesty bill, which was contested by the people who were in the opposition at that time, who have approved the present finance bill in the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court decided that it was inconsistent with the constitution. So Ranil Wickremesinghe had to drop it. Now we have the present amnesty bill. Why foreigners are not interested in bringing their money in terms of the promises given by the Sri Lankan government is that they know Sri Lanka government doesn't have a continuous and consistent policy. When one minister, finance minister changes and another finance minister takes over from the same party, one governor leaves and another governor comes to the central bank, the policies are changed. There's no continuity. If a different political party comes to power, they are completely changed. And also they know there is no such thing as a secrecy in Sri Lanka. Therefore, nobody wants to bring money into these things. That's why they fail. So what the government should do and what Governor Cabral should do immediately is to establish an environment conducive for these people to bring this money by winning their trust. For that purpose, we'll have to have rule of law. We have to have an independent judiciary. And we have to maintain law and order. And we have to have a prudent budgetary system, and we have to have a professional central bank. Those are the things that we have to have. Without that, no one will trust Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and no one will trust actually government of Sri Lanka. Then there have been these arm twisting methods actually practiced by Central Bank of Sri Lanka, according to commercial bankers, to keep the rupee at 203 rupees per US dollar by threatening them that they cannot sell the dollar above that particular rate prescribed by the central bank. In fact, central bank has been a little merciful. It has said, we have given you a range from 200 to 203. It's not a one nighter. Any banks can go up to 203 or they can sell at 200. It doesn't matter. But who is the seller who can sell it at 203 would sell it for 200? And no seller would do that. But there was, when central bank has fixed the exchange rate at that level, one of the obligations of the central bank is to supply an unlimited amount of foreign currencies to the market when the market needs them. But with the depletion of the central bank's foreign reserves, and also the necessity for central bank to meet all other priority area foreign payments, market was not supplied with that one, and therefore bankers were asked to collect foreign exchange and pay the pay for importers. As a result, when an importer goes to a bank, what happened was the importer was told, we can't open your LC. We have to wait until such time we collect some money, because some banks are, actually fortunate in this sense, because banks like Bank of Ceylon, it gets lots of foreign exchange. But small banks like PABC or National Trust Bank, they don't get enough foreign exchange. So the customers of those banks had to wait a longer late in this, whereas the customers of Bank of Ceylon had to wait only a shorter long. This scarcity has given rise to a vibrant and thriving black market, where the rate sometimes went up to 206 rupees per US dollar. Then what happened was, Central Bank just relaxed a little bit of this arm twisting tactics and allowed banks to sell at whatever the rate that they want to sell. So the banking rate went up to some 225 to 230 rupees per US dollar. Then all of a sudden, Central Bank walked from this deep slumber and introduced requested banks by way of not a direction, but a letter to act in national interest and not to sell dollars above the range that the central bank has prescribed. That means between 200 and 203. And since every banker knows they cannot continue their business with that type of, interview, they immediately cut down changed their websites, and they put the selling rate of dollars as 203, but dollars were not available. What happened was the black market became more vibrant as a result. Since it has been introduced by this Governor Lakshman, I have called it Lakshman shock. Now, these shock treatments are done by central banks from time to time when the situation in the economy becomes chaotic, and there is no any other way of bringing normalcy to the order to the economy. For example, Governor Rasaputra in 1982 shock treated the economy because at that time inflation was rising about 22%, money supply was rising about 20%, foreign exchange reserves were falling, interest rates were also about say 20%, gold prices had gone up. So we were in a very critical situation, and he introduced such a shock treatment. But what he advised us, because I was at that time a senior economist in the Economic Research Department of Central Bank, he said, this is only a temporary thing. You can't depend on these shock treatments permanently because it will kill the patient. Now, What he meant was that if you apply this shock treatment to a heart person who had got a heart attack, and if you keep him plugged into the electricity supply longer than necessary, he will die. The same thing will happen to the economy. He said, immediately after we have bring order to the economy, you must be ready to introduce the market-based monetary policies. And that is what we did in year 1982. But fortunately today, when Governor Cabral spoke to Bloomberg, he had said he's thinking of reversing the modern monetary theory practiced by his predecessor. He's thinking of releasing the price control, because he said the repressed inflation by price controls will be visited back and he will be releasing them. And also, he said that the interest rates will be released. Now, as a sign of that, you would have noted when the first treasury bill auction under his governorship to be done on next Wednesday, the notice calling for bids for the treasury bill auction was issued yesterday. And in that notice, there is no ceiling on the treasury bills to be bid by the primary dealers. That ceiling has been taken out. So what I expect is that on Wednesday, when the auction takes place, probably the central bank might allow the interest rates to go up a little bit, because remember, Governor Cabral said he will reverse all this gradually without causing a pain to Sri Lanka's economy. So it may be a little bit, but it will actually be a continued process. So the current issues are so acute that the solutions that the government and the central bank had introduced are not sufficient. They will not help Sri Lanka. And the solutions are we have to go to IMF and get a line of credit from IMF, because that will help Sri Lanka to build its confidence in the market. But investors will actually come back to us when they see that Sri Lanka has got a certificate from IMF. But of course, we are too late today. It takes about 6 to 8 months time for Sri Lanka to negotiate a loan facility with IMF. So most probably if we start today, the IMF loan might come in the middle of next year, but I don't know whether we would be able to survive till that time. And the other reform is the reform of the budget. Increase the revenue base of the government, because one big mistake committed by the present government when it came to power in November 2019 was the offering of an unsolicited attractive tax package to income tax payers and value-added tax payers. It had cost heavily on the government. In year 2020 alone, government lost an income of 516 billion Sri Lanka rupees compared to the income it had gained in year 2019. If you take the income level that the government got in 2019 as a percent of GDP, which was 12%, and if you apply that to the GDP, projected GDP in year 2021, the revenue which the government is going to get in this year will be short of 600 billion US dollars. And this will be continued in 2021 to 23, 24, until such time the Inland Department is able to capture all those people who are not paying income tax into the tax rate. The reforming budget means that the expenditure side also have to be pruned. Money has to be more allocated for the productivity increase like Singapore, education, healthcare services, infrastructure, research and development, not for consumption purposes. Then the economic reforms have to be introduced by Sri Lanka today. The reforms are wide range reforms in order to increase the ease of doing business in Sri Lanka and increase the competitiveness of Sri Lankans as businessmen, so that foreigners will have some actually comfort coming back to Sri Lanka. And those are measures which Sri Lanka has to take into account. For that purpose, it is necessary to deregulate the economy. And for that purpose, I would have loved if President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has appointed a permanent deregulation commission with powers to deregulate the economy. Good example I will tell you. Now we have been ranked in the ease of doing business around say 95 to 110 throughout this period by the World Bank. One of the reasons why we are ranked so low is the cost and the time taken to get an electricity connection by a small and medium enterprise in Sri Lanka. The World Bank has repeatedly said it takes about 100 days in Sri Lanka for an SME to get electricity connection at a cost of some 4 million Sri Lanka rupees. Whereas in Singapore, it is 3 days time, even in India, 7 days time, and the cost is a fraction of that. So these are the things that has to be done. So the electricity board and its selling and marketing mechanism have to be completely changed, completely reformed. And for that purpose, I would have loved had President Gotabaya Rajapaksa had appointed a permanent deregulation commission with powers to do so. This will enable Sri Lanka to move into the long-term growth path, where we may be able to push the growth rate above this magic number of 7% continuously and become a developed country within a single generation, that is by year 2050. By 2050, I will not be living, but of course, you know, our grandchildren may experience a developed country if the present government takes appropriate policy measures to do so. I have come to the end of my presentation, and we'll have a question and answer session now, and I will hand it over to our moderator. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for that insightful presentation from your side. We've got a few questions that are coming from the participants. One of the questions, Doctor, that had come through is to say that, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Almost all the experts are requesting the government to move towards IMF. And from the government side, they have shown some level of reluctance to do so. What are the kind of key reasons you could attribute to this, demonstration of reluctance?
Well, it's a not new thing, because I have been in the central bank for nearly 40 years, and during my time, almost every government was first reluctant to go to IMF, saying that IMF is a colonial institution. And they say they have their own agenda and they don't want to betray the trust of Sri Lankans to that particular colonial agenda. But when things become, uncontrollable, those people, like good, politicians, they follow their words and they go back to IMF and they get the IMF facility. That is exactly how all these 16 facilities had been obtained by Sri Lanka during from year 1965 onwards. If you look at the cost of going to IMF and cost of borrowing money from, say, through a soft facility with China, then you will be able to understand the real gravity. The IMF loans are available at a nominal interest rate of 0.05%. It's less than even 0.1%. Plus additional service charges about, say, 1 to 1.5%. So the total cost is less than 2%. And they are repayable in 7 to 8 year time period in half-yearly installments. And therefore, there's no burden for Sri Lanka to repay them through the period. Also, all these loans are connected to a reform program, which the government of Sri Lanka promises to IMF. Remember, most people in Sri Lanka think it is the IMF which puts these conditions. No. When Sri Lanka goes to IMF for a loan facility, the both Minister of Finance and Governor of the Central Bank will sign a letter of intent and submit that letter of intent to IMF, saying that if you give us this loan, these are the reforms that we introduced to Sri Lanka. So the conditions are actually imposed by us, by ourselves, not by IMF. IMF is just a lender. And those conditions are the ones that I have mentioned. You have to reform the budget, you have to reform the, to remove all the exchange control and import controls. You have to remove the interest rate controls. You have to increase the budget revenue. You have to come up with a revenue program to increase the productivity of your budget, and also reform your non-performing and unviable public sector enterprises. And all those are the things that the government of Sri Lanka normally promises to IMF. And IMF accept them, and people here we views it as a condition imposed by IMF. No, it's a condition that we impose on ourselves. Now compare this with the facility as Governor Cabral has said he's going to get from China. Okay, say this 1.5 billion, 5 billion yuan facility that equivalent to US dollar 1.5 billion that he has already got from China. What happens is that the interest rate, as I told you, is about a little over 2%, 2.05%. But the now we have to give the equivalent amount of 1.5 billion US dollars at the rate of say 200 US dollar. It's about 3 trillion Sri Lanka rupees. So that's why Governor Cabral said, even though we have got this credit line, we are not going to use it. But he knows producing 3 trillion Sri Lanka rupees immediately and releasing it to the market will mean we are actually inundating the Sri Lankan economy with new money, and inflation will go through the skies. And that money will be credited to an account in the central bank, or if they say, just like in the case of Bangladesh Bank, in an account in a commercial bank. China can use that money to meet its embassy expenditure during this period, or finance the local component of any development project that they would bring to Sri Lanka, or invest that money in treasury bills and earn a comfortable rate of 6% today. And that 6% we have to allow them to take out. So the interest cost will be around say 8%. Whereas in the case of IMF, the interest cost is plus about say 2%. The cost is not that, as I mentioned earlier, it's a bullet repayment. And at the end of the period, if suppose Sri Lanka has utilized the entire 1.5 billion, and China calls for it, and we don't have 1.5 billion with us, and we have to borrow it from the market. At what rate? At 10 to 12% today. So that's the risk we are handling. So this is not clearly explained to Sri Lankan public, and that is why public thinks that IMF is devil. It actually is a demon. It tries to swallow us. That is the type of message that has been given, and even the people in the central bank have not tried to explain it. When we explain it, we are considered as people who are being paid out by IMF people.
Right. Doctor, another question that a lot of people are talking about is that from the time that we had the Easter bomb attack to now, the economy has been going through multiple shocks. And we are talking about economic reforms that are required in our country in order for us to get back to proper situation. So by looking at one of the things as a solution that you said was we got to come out with economic reforms that is going to improve our ease of doing business ranking that we currently we enjoy. So what kind of solid economic reforms that in your opinion would work for us in terms of enhancing the current rankings that we have for our country?
Well, if you go through this ease of doing business, it has been categorized under several headings. One is the land reform. Land titles are still in hard copy form with the Registrar General's Department. They have to be converted to digital form, and that was the actually objective of this Millennium Challenge Corporation grant that was given to Sri Lanka in year 2018 to convert the Registrar General Department into an e-department rather than a paper-based department, so that anybody who wants to know the title of land, he can do it from his home. He doesn't have to run take, there are searching people who have been employed by these lawyers. You don't have to send a fellow to the residential department, and you can do it from your home. That is one, the land title. Second one is the regulations with respect to, I have already talked about the electricity board, electricity supply. The most important one is the customs and the port services. They should be converted to the EE departments. Payment should be made. Of course, now we have gone far away with this Lanka Pay system. Now you can pay your customs duty through Lanka Pay from your home. Similarly, Inland Department will have to they have this management information
RAMIS system, revenue
administration management RAMIS, and RAMIS said actually it's not working properly. For example, I cannot file my tax returns through e-services so far, but of course I can pay my tax through Lanka Pay. That is another important thing. Otherwise, I have to go and stand in the queue of Bank of Ceylon and pay it, and the Bank of Ceylon will collect the money now. Because the Bank of Ceylon is a cunning banker, smart banker, and there is a floating time until the check realizes. It uses that money to, actually, before it credits the Inland Department, uses that money to earn money by lending in the coal money market. Huge amount of money. So I can now pay my tax through the e-system, but of course the RAMIS will have to be introduced, in full. So likewise, there are a number of reforms that we can introduce even during the time where the country has been hit by a shock. Now remember, it is easy to introduce these reforms, which may not be, I think, painless, when you are suffering from an ailment. For example, if you know that you will die tomorrow, what would happen is you will take even the most bitter medicine which your wife gives you.
Doctor, one other question is on this ease of doing business. Sri Lanka is also famous for bribery and corruption. Now, there are multiple things we need to bring in as reforms, but at the same time, little seem to have been done on the fronts of curbing bribery and corruption. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, we can go in for reforms, but if we don't do anything on the bribery and corruption side to curb it, those envisaged benefits would not be enjoyed by the country. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, as I told you, the most important basic reform that we have to do is to maintain the rule of law and order, and eliminate bribery and corruption, because every one of us know the bribery and corruption is a cost on society. It actually enables one party to get himself enriched at the cost of other people without doing anything unproductive. For example, Dulita, you may be earning your income by working hard in your accounting firm. But at the same time, there is another while remaining at home. So these are the things that have to be eliminated. In fact, when we had this Yahapalana government of 2015, we expected the Yahapalana government to do it concretely in order to eliminate them. What they did was they actually set up an independent bribery or corruption commission. But when it came to taking people to the courts, they were very selective. Some people were eliminated, simply ignored, and some people whom they thought that should be punished were brought before the court. So if it is a bribery or corruption commission, that commission should work independently of any interference from anyone. Even if the country's head of the state is, subject to, he has been charged with this kind of bribery or corruption, Commission will have to take action against it. You have seen in India, even without a bribery or corruption commission, you would have seen the Indian prime ministers or previous prime ministers were taken to. Good example I can give you is in the case of Singapore, because there was a charge when actually during this time, Lee Kuan Yew was not the prime minister. He was just the senior minister. His son and his daughter were charged by the political opponents that they had the crony land deal. So what Lee Kuan Yew told the incumbent prime minister, investigate this. If you find that these two people have committed the crime, committed an offense, take them to court. They were actually properly investigated, but later it was found that there was no any undue thing being done by them. But Lee Kuan Yew ordered his son and daughter to return every money that they had got via this crony land deal. So that is the type of example we have to set up in our country. Without that, as you say, I agree with you, bribery is there. I have no incentive to work because there is another guy without actually, even standing from his, seat. Just by giving a phone call, he is earning multiple times of your income.
Right. So now on this situation of the foreign currency and the balance of payment side, there are different options that people are talking about. On one hand, people are speculating that the government is planning on resorting to assets that it has to be sold, those assets to foreign countries with the hope of getting some money. That's one option. Then on the other hand, if you try and improve your balance of trade by some means or the other through different reforms that you would be bringing in, again, that will lead to a certain level of solution. Now, taking multiple solutions that people are talking about, do you think the government is taking adequate measures in these areas to improve on these, or are they doing very little on these areas? What are your thoughts on those?
Well, of course, about this asset sale, the government is, I think, going well because they have this Helandiwa project, under which some of the unutilized land or unutilized businesses, unutilized assets in Sri Lanka are to be sold to foreigners. But remember, what would happen is it takes time. You cannot do it today, tomorrow, because it's just like selling a loaf of bread to a customer, because he goes to the baker and get the loaf of bread. It's not just that. You have to first establish the rules for that. And we have not so far established the rules. And those rules will have to be transparent. If they are opaque and if you do underhand deals, later on, we run the risk of being criticized that it had already led to certain amount of malpractices. So these rules have to be framed. Then you have to call for international bids. You have to appoint independent tender boards, evaluation boards. Then you have to go for the final approval of the sale of the cargo by getting the highest price that is possible. It takes time. So, but remember, one problem with that is after you have sold all your assets, what do you sell?
Absolutely.
Suppose you have sold your trouser, you have sold your shirt. Are you going to sell your underwear? No. So this is a very temporary measure. Very temporary measure. But long-term development is the improvement of the export of goods and services by Sri Lanka. There again, we have a problem because we had been actually concentrating on three things. One is this apparel export, which brings about $5 billion per annum. Then we have tea, about $1.5 billion. Rubber and coconut taken together about say 250, but we cannot export any more rubber because our rubber industry, the industrial base based on rubber, has to import rubber, sheet rubber, and from say Vietnam and Thailand now. We have a shortage. So what we have done is we have actually concentrated on producing goods that can be easily copied by other people. The apparel industry, all you need is a design sewing machine and the hands of a woman who is willing to operate that machine and the raw materials. Anyone can, duplicate it without any problem. So we are losing ground in the existing export base. All we have to do is we have to move into a complex production system where other countries cannot copy us easily. And as a result, the Sri Lanka would be able to maintain its presence in the international markets continuously. In that respect, it is the high-tech exports in terms of commodities, visible commodities that we have to go for. And we can learn some lessons from Vietnam, because Vietnam introduced in year 2020 a 10-year roadmap to convert Vietnam into the fourth industrial revolution by year 2030. By expanding the high-tech export component of Vietnam too, because if you take the fourth industrial revolution, it's a country which has high-tech component of exports more than 40%. So you have to increase it to more than 40%. Now Sri Lanka's high-tech export component is about 2%. So we have a long way to go. So what we have to do is to go into this high-tech production thing. And also we must remember the fact that we cannot produce the final commodity in Sri Lanka today, because the world production process is such that it is being contributed to by a number of producers scattered throughout the world. For example, if you take this iPhone, which is finally assembled in Foxconn factory in China, there are more than 487 production units scattered throughout the world that would supply the components for iPhone, so which we call the global production sharing network. So we have to join the global production sharing network, and we have to make money out of that. Now already our Lanka Harness Limited at Diagama is producing these sensors for the motor cars. About 20% of the global market is made by us. And before the COVID-19 pandemic, Mass Fabric in Tulluriya was producing the canvas for the Nike shoes, but now of course it has converted its production plant to produce this face mask. Similarly, there were attempts at penetrating the global production network, sharing network, and we have to do that. And that is one of the things that we have to do. For that purpose, we have 6 faculties of technology in our local university system. And those faculties of technology are just producing, because they think that their mission and vision is to produce more graduates in technology who are unemployed. They don't realize that they have to get themselves connected to the private businesses, develop the technology with the private businesses on, sell them at a price so that university also will benefit out of that. And the private business will also benefit because they can produce an output for the rest of the world. And that could have been done at the Tech City in Pitipana when it was introduced, and there was actually a plan to get about 5 or 6 large-scale private sector businesses there, but only Hemas Drugs had moved into that one, and no other one has gone there. They have set up the Faculty of Technology of University of Sijawardhanapura there without any private sector business. University of Colombo is yet to establish its Faculty of Technology there. And most unfortunately, Dulita, there's no road access to that particular tech city. After Highwell Road from Homagama, you have to go in a very narrow road, and if there is another bus coming from the opposite direction, you have to reverse your bus until Homagama town to allow that bus to pass. So that is why we have this problem. And we must have a wholesale solution, and that is one of the lost opportunities for Sri Lanka. Then we have to go for services. Now services, remember, whatever we produce, the manufactured product, we have to import goods, and the value addition is limited. But services like, say, ICT, value addition is 100%. And that is what we can actually develop in Sri Lanka for the rest of the world.
Right. Thank you very much, Doctor. I think the last question that I intended asking you was out of the solutions that you proposed, the long term. What are the things that we should be doing on the long term to be on the growth path? I think you touched upon each and every one of them as to what we should be doing. Particularly getting onto the global supply chain and be a value creator in that huge global supply chain. And we are in the Silk Route, and how we should be leveraging our positioning in the global map to be able to contribute and to be able to gain out of this situation. So with all that, thank you very much, Dr. Wijewardena, for sparing your time and being with us this evening for those valuable insights that you shared with us for the benefit of all of our members who are present here today. So once again, thanking you on that note, may I please invite our General Secretary, Attorney at Law, Ms. Ruchira Gunasekara, to propose the vote of thanks. Over to you, Ms. Ruchira.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dulitha Perera, President-elect of the OPA. Ladies and gentlemen, very good evening to you all. On behalf of the Organization of Professional Associations of Sri Lanka, at the outset, our sincere thanks to the eminent panelist, Dr. W. Wijewardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, for his invaluable contribution at this webinar on Sri Lanka's current financial situation. Dr. Wijewadena's long experience as a Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka explained in detail the current financial difficulties the country is facing, as well as what remedial action could be taken, and giving his insights. Thank you, sir. In this regard, I would like to thank the Chairman of the National Issues Committee, Engineer Arjuna Manamperi, and his committee members for their efforts in organizing this webinar. Our sincere thanks to Mr. Dulitha Perera, President-elect of the OPA, for his contribution as the moderator this evening. I would also like to thank the President, Engineer Shant Senra, office bearers, Chairman and Chairperson of the standing committees, past presidents, members of the Executive Council and the General Forum for their advice and guidance towards this webinar. Also heartfelt thanks to our audience for their participation, active participation, and for their patience as well. I appreciate the support extended by the staff of the OPS Secretariat. I thank you all once again, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, and good night to everybody.